This is a short video about the Brown street clock. These street clocks have a cast iron base, which is this section. This column is just sheet metal that's been fluted, and then you have a cast iron top. And then you have the clock head, which sits on this top. And we'll just kind of describe briefly how this operates. Now, as far as moving the clock around, I suggest that the best place is to hook up a strap at this point. You don't want to put a strap down here on this sheet metal column because that can't take any weight. So the best place to grab that, and then you can lift the clock up, and with a couple of guys you can, balance it and straighten it up and set it on to bolts that are already placed in the concrete. I've painted my clock green, dark green, with gold trim. That was kind of a standard color for street clocks, but of course you can paint it any color you want. Now, the best thing to use for gold trim, if you painted it black and then wanted to put some gold trim on it, you'd want to use gold leaf would be the best thing, but that's pretty expensive. So what I found online was gold paint that's called One Shot, and you can find this on the internet. Just Google One Shot lettering enamel, and it's a good gold paint that lasts several years, and then you just touch it up and repaint it. I'll show you what the clock movement here looks like. This is the Brown street clock movement. Maybe I can get some better light on it here. And originally, the Brown street clock movement was weight driven, and it had two weights in a pendulum that hung in this case. But this movement, they've added a 1 RPM electric motor to it, so you don't have to wind it. Now, what originally happened was, this is how it sets. And then if you want to, let's say, change the time on the clock, all you do is there's a thumb screw right here, and you just turn that thumb screw, and then you can turn the shaft that goes up through the column to the clock head. And of course, this just plugs in 110, and you're good to go there. And this just lifts out when you go to hook it up. So what we'll do is set this aside. I can just pull this clock movement out. This particular one, they've shimmed it with that piece of wood, but that's the clock movement. There's not really that much to it. And as I said before, that shaft goes all the way up into the clock head. And now we'll look down here at the clock head. The clock head is made out of cast iron. They were all the same, and they just sit down on this cast iron piece. This collar just sets down on here, and there's 4 bolts there that you just tighten down. Now, Brown Street Clock Company had a couple of different tops for these clock heads. One was just a fancy cast iron, kind of a finial type piece that just mounted on the top. This particular clock has the marquee style clock head topper, and we'll show you what that looks like. I've got it setting over here. This too is cast iron, and it just sits on the top of that clock head, and there's just 4 bolt holes that hold this onto the clock head. And originally these were probably milk glass. What I've got in mine is just kind of a plexiglass. And it's not the clear, it's just the white. So they can be, you can add your graphics. And the same goes for the clock face. Originally it was milk glass, but this one is just the white plastic. And that you can buy at any glass store. Now we'll set this up and I can show you what this looks like. We'll take it apart here. Originally this outer covering would have been glass, but you can use plexiglass. And after a few years, of course, it gets scratched up. Well, you just toss it out and buy a new one. This piece here is cast iron. It's what holds the face on. That's just one piece, and there's 3 screws that hold this on to the clock face. Of course, I can show you the clock hands here. The hour hand just frictions on. That just frictions on. This is threaded. So this you put on and then run it backwards, I believe, like that, until it stops. And then of course your hour hand is friction, so you can just turn this very easily. But make sure that this is turned all the way in, and you might have to grab a hold of it from behind and hold the gearing. So we'll take this off here. Now this dial is just plexiglass, as I said before. And we'll show you the clock gearing here a little closer. I've wrapped up my wiring, but this wiring goes down through this hole all the way down to the base, and then you plug it in for your lights. And the thing about that is, since we've got this shaft coming up through the same hole, I guess you could run your power through the smaller hole, but you want to try to keep that electrical wire away from this shaft. You don't want that rubbing. Now this shaft comes up through and hooks into this piece, and there's just a little screw there that you tighten it up with. And so as the clock is turning, your gearing is turning. It's all pretty simple. And of course you want to make sure that the wiring is away from the clock gearing here. And they're the same type of gearing on both sides, so you have 2 faces there. Now, some of these clocks have neon tubes in them. This one I just put this type of lighting in, but you could put in the tubing and run a transformer. The way you get in to make adjustments or grease this clock or oil it is through an opening that you can see right there in the clock case. So there's just 2 screws and an access cover, and you should be able to reach in and change the bulbs if necessary. These 2 bulbs would be for the marquee on the top. That kind of shows you how these are put together. There were originally lion's heads, 2 on each clock, and it looks like this, and there's just a screw that goes in his mouth there, and that fits like that. Just put a screw in it, and that's all they had. So that gives you an idea about the Brown street clock and how it's assembled.